As someone who studies language, I've always been fascinated by how words and their meanings change according to the social atmosphere. And recently I've noticed that the word cope has slightly shifted in tone a little bit. I'm not quite sure when it started or how exactly it started, but it seems like coping became an internet meme to point fingers at people denying something bad or making excuses for things to feel better about themselves. And I realize that the word cope has been used this way for quite a while now. But it's only recently when I realized that there is a very similar internet slang / modern term used by Korean people. In Korea, we use the expression 정신승리하다. And it's a two-part word where 정신 means mental or spirit and 승리 means victory. So if you combine these two words, 정신승리하다 means you are spiritually winning. And this is actually used to describe a person who is not accepting that he actually lost, but coping in order to comfort his mind by imagining a victory in his head. So basically, it's a similar mockery used to point fingers at people who deny reality and wins inside their minds. And this expression of 정신승리하네, 정신승리하고 있네, is closely aligned with bro, that's cope, you're coping. And after I made this small little discovery between the two analogous expressions from two different cultures, I went a little deeper into finding the origin of these two expressions. And here's what I found. So back in the year of 1921, there was a Chinese story writer. His name was Lu Xun. And he wrote a novel called The True Story of A-Q. And this is known as a satirical novel that critiques the early 20th century China. And this story follows A-Q, who is the main character, and he is an impoverished, nameless peasant living in the village of Weizhuang. And this man survives by doing all sorts of odd jobs. And despite being at the bottom of the social hierarchy and suffering constant abuse, A-Q believes that he himself is superior to all those around him through this method called 정신승리, which is spiritual victory method. But the spiritual victories in A-Q's mind are essentially extreme forms of self-delusion used to cope with all sorts of humiliation that he goes through. So for example, after being physically abused by another villager, A-Q comforts himself by thinking, this man only beat me because I remind him of his abusive father, and it would be beneath me to respond back and fight a son. So eventually, in A-Q's mind, this makes the attacker somehow the loser. In another case, A-Q has unsightly scars on his head, which makes him quite embarrassed whenever someone points it out to him. So if another person mentions his scars, he would become triggered and become very angry about it. But soon, he tells himself that those people are simply not worthy of bearing or having such distinguished marks, and no one would understand them. Which is quite a valid coping mechanism in a way to protect his own mind. I don't know. But eventually in the end, A-Q's fate meets a tragic ending where he becomes accused of a crime that he didn't commit and eventually becomes executed. So I'm a little dubious of how much impact this 1921 story has had on modern day internet community in Korean society, but the word 정신승리 became a staple term that dominated mainstream Korean media, and it also dominated the comment sections on the internet. And this was all happening around the year of 2000. So it was the early 2000 to the mid 2000s, which was nearly 80 years or 80 something years after the true story of Aki was published. And until quite recently, the word cope, if you think about this, was not necessarily a mockery. It wasn't a negative word used to mock other people. It had this connotation of describing somewhat of a neutral situation. For example, if you are going through a difficult time or a difficult situation, you might be coping with it in order to deal with the new emotions and difficulties. So that was what it was used back in the days. But nowadays it feels like after the year of 2020, the word cope became somewhat of a newer and sarcastic internet slang, often used to mock people who are settling for mediocrity or people who are not facing reality or people who are giving up. And this simply became cope. So people use this word in the manner of, that's pure cope, or just cope harder, man, or something along the lines of that. And this is almost the same way as Korean people saying, 또 정신승리하고 있네. 정신승리나 해라, which is also a kind of a mockery. So if you look at this, we are seeing an alignment between two different cultures. So they're coming together slowly. And after decades of talk about a perfectly unified global community, I guess this must be that dream finally coming true, right?